Hi everyone, welcome back to Radio Night Crime. Before you drift off, let me know in the comments where you're listening from. If you're enjoying the stories, don't forget to like and subscribe. Now let's relax and jump into tonight's case. Story 1. This is Robbie Middleton, also known as Robbie, born on June 28, 1990, in Splendora, Texas, USA. He grew up in a loving family consisting of his parents, Bobby and Colleen Middleton, and his sister, Heather. The Middleton family lived in a small town where everyone knew each other. Robbie was described by everyone as a friendly, cheerful, and curious child. Like many children his age, he loved spending time outdoors, and what Robbie loved the most was camping. He had long dreamed of having his own tent, and when Robbie turned 8, his parents decided to make that dream come true. That day should have been the happiest day of Robbie's life, but unfortunately, everything turned out to be quite the opposite. June 28, 1998 began as the happiest day for the Middleton family. When Robbie woke up, he was greeted with warm love from his parents and 2 gifts, a large box and a small envelope. Opening the box, Robbie couldn't hide his excitement. He immediately recognized it was the tent he had always longed for. After thanking his parents, Robbie opened the envelope to find a significant amount of money, at least by the standards of an 8-year-old. A little while later, Robbie told his parents he wanted to use his new tent to celebrate his birthday with his best friend. He asked for permission to set up the tent in the backyard and buy fireworks for the not only did his parents agree, but they also took him to the mall to buy what he needed. After shopping, Robbie waited until it was dark to pick up his friend, who lived in the same town, but on the other side of the woods. Although the path was quite secluded and poorly lit, Robbie, who was familiar with the route, bravely made his way without fearing any danger. However, everything changed that day. The boy was brutally attacked. Robbie was tied to a tree with fishing net, then doused with gasoline and set on fire. No matter how much he screamed in agony, no one heard him. Ironically, the intense pain kept him from passing out and pulled him back from the brink of death. When the net holding Robbie burned away, he was able to break free. Exhausted, Robbie crawled towards the path leading home. At the same time, Robbie's neighbors were on their way home from work when they saw him crawling out of the woods. At first, they thought Robbie's clothes were covered in mud, but as they approached, they realized he wasn't dirty, but severely burned. Robbie looked horrifying, his body still smoking and reeking of gasoline. His eyes were wide with shock, his skin blistered, eyelids, lips, hair, and sensitive areas all blackened by burns. Seeing the smoke rising from the woods, one of the neighbors ran in to check if the fire was completely out. After going about 100 meters into the woods, the neighbor found the burned site. A small tree was almost completely charred, the ground around it soaked with gasoline, and the air still carried the scent of fuel. Meanwhile, Robbie kept repeating that he couldn't see. He was cold and very thirsty. Some locals brought water, blankets, and ice for Robbie. Luckily, someone among them knew how to provide first aid for burns. This person warned others not to touch Robbie and not to give him water, as it could worsen his condition. While the neighbors tried to help Robbie, his parents had started to worry because Robbie hadn't returned home. They stepped outside and saw a group of people gathered at the end of the road calling for an ambulance. Instinctively, they rushed over and saw a child with severe burns all over his body. Recognizing Robbie's red sneakers, Colleen immediately realized that the burned child was her son. People began asking Robbie what had happened. Was it an accident or did someone attack him? At first, Robbie seemed unsure how to respond, but eventually he said he was attacked by a teenager named Rex Taylor who had thrown gasoline in his face. Right then, the first ambulance arrived on the scene. Not long after, Robbie was taken to a small hospital in Houston, but due to the severity of his injuries, he was immediately transferred to a medical center in Galveston. Later, Robbie's parents were informed that 99% of his body had third-degree burns. This meant he had almost no chance of survival. Robbie was immediately taken into surgery to remove most of the burned skin. Doctors also began the process of grafting artificial skin onto Robbie. The only part of Robbie's body not burned was a small patch of skin on his right leg, which experts used to cultivate thousands of small grafts for the surgery. Against all odds, Robbie survived. However, his life from then on was tied to long, arduous days in medical centers. The investigation into the incident began the very next day. Through the statements of neighbors, Robbie identified a teenager named Rex as his attacker. However, Rex claimed that at the time of the incident, he and his friends were swimming in the river. Since this group of teenagers cooperated with the authorities voluntarily, the detectives eliminated them from the suspect list. With no other leads, the investigation reached a deadlock. But not long after, the police found a new suspect, Don Wilburn Collins, a 13-year-old with a bad reputation. According to the information gathered, he was born in 1985. There is very little information about Don's parents and childhood. His mother died when he was about 8 years old. After that, he moved in with his father, who seemed to have passed on bad habits like smoking and drinking to him. When Don's father went to jail, he started living a vagrant life with distant relatives until his aunt and uncle, his mother's brother, took him in. These two lived in the same town as Robbie's family. Don was known for animal cruelty and often bullied younger children. Perhaps because of this, no one in town allowed their children to play with him. In contrast to Robbie, who was loved by everyone, Don was not sociable with anyone. He had no close friends, seeming to enjoy stalking and bullying those smaller than him, children he was jealous of. Detectives took notice of Don after seeing him appear on television, commenting on the incident. This teenager had done a couple of impromptu interviews with different news channels, talking about how he thought Rex had set Robbie on fire. During conversations with reporters, Don mentioned details that only someone who directly witnessed the attack would know. He also mentioned that he had recently played with gasoline and burned his hand, and that Robbie's incident had haunted him in nightmares. On July 31, 1998, in an effort to continue the investigation, detectives met with Robbie and his mother to record his statement. Robbie said he couldn't clearly see the attacker's face because he was attacked from behind. He vaguely remembered seeing a piece of paper, a gasoline can, and some dogs. Moreover, Robbie recounted that just before being set on fire, he heard a car door slam shut. He felt one of his attackers might be Don because he recognized his voice. However, Robbie also mentioned hearing another voice that sounded older. It should be noted that throughout this conversation, Robbie was under the influence of many painkillers and sedatives, so his thoughts were not very clear. This meant Robbie's statement didn't hold much weight. However, a few days later, the detective spoke again with Robbie's mother, who said that this time her son not only named his attackers, but also detailed what they had done. Thanks to this information, the detectives obtained a warrant for Don's arrest. During interrogation, this teenager admitted to participating in the attack on Robbie. Notably, when he was placed in juvenile detention, he repeatedly threatened other teens, saying he would burn them alive like Robbie. Some of these teens reported this to social workers, who then contacted the detectives with the information. According to one of the teens' statements, Don said he set Robbie on fire because he and his uncle had previously forced Robbie to have sexual relations. In reality, they were afraid Robbie would tell his parents about it. The teen also stated that Don had said he found it very interesting to watch Robbie's eyes after setting him on fire, thinking they would pop out of their sockets. Despite all these statements, the prosecution decided to drop the case against Don, and by January 2000, he was released. The main reason for this outcome was likely due to the conflicting statements Robbie made about the identity of his attacker. Despite all efforts by Robbie's family to seek justice, the investigation remained stalled. For the next 13 years, Robbie's life was an unending battle. He spent most of his time in medical centers, undergoing numerous surgeries and painful treatments, with over 150 major and minor operations. Yet, Robbie's spirit was never broken. Thanks to the unwavering support from his family members, Robbie became an icon of resilience and courage. He even returned to normal life and continued attending school. However, things didn't go as smoothly as he wished, as he immediately faced taunts from some classmates because of his appearance. But with strong willpower and acceptance of reality, Robbie found many good friends who understood and empathized with him. Despite everything, Robbie showed extraordinary bravery every day. Not only that, Robbie cared about others, not just himself. He regularly met with victims of similar attacks, becoming their advocate. Robbie even initiated a fundraising campaign for research in the field of grafting. His compassion and altruism serve as a poignant reminder of what truly matters in life. However, if Robbie became a shining example for many, Don seemed to continue his path of crime. In 2001, at the age of 16, Don was convicted of child molestation. He served only about 4 years for this crime. After that, his life was a cycle of imprisonment and release. Importantly, Robbie never doubted that Don was the one who had caused him such pain. Perhaps for that reason, in 2010, Robbie and his family filed a civil lawsuit, accusing him of attempted murder. And perhaps the first glimmer of hope for justice appeared when the Middleton family sought the help of Craig Seiko, a civil attorney who assisted in filing the lawsuit against Don. Craig's idea was to obtain a copy of the police report and legally find a way to reopen the criminal case. He then obtained crucial investigation documents, interviewed one of the detectives, and spoke with the doctors who treated Robbie. Sadly, while the lawsuit was underway, Robbie's condition suddenly deteriorated. Despite his valiant fight against the consequences of the attack, Robbie was diagnosed with skin cancer, which took his life at the end of April 2011. In his final act of bravery, Robbie recorded a 27-minute video where he revealed the truth about what happened on that fateful day, along with details he had tried to keep hidden for years. Robbie recounted events that happened weeks before the arson. According to Robbie, Don had forced him to that place and humiliated him. Robbie insisted he was treated that way because he had witnessed Don molesting another boy. Additionally, Robbie said on the day of the arson, he felt like he heard the voice of an adult man, possibly Don's uncle. After recording this statement, Robbie passed away. Days later, dozens of people attended Robbie's funeral to express their condolences. While Robbie's loved ones struggled with their grief, his lawyer continued to participate in the lawsuit, adding new evidence. In early September 2011, Don, who was serving a sentence, was released again. 3 months later, the civil trial proceeded. After viewing the video Robbie recorded before his death, the jury made a symbolic ruling, ordering Don to pay the Middleton family $150 billion in damages. This was the highest civil lawsuit award in U.S. history. Although they knew they would never receive this amount, Robbie's parents considered the verdict a form of justice for their son. Moreover, money was never their primary goal. After the civil trial concluded, the Montgomery County Sheriff's Office and the District Attorney's Office announced they would reopen the investigation. And it must be said, this task was far from simple. The new investigation involved interviewing over 200 potential witnesses and obtaining conclusions from experts in various fields. During the investigation, detectives revisited most of the original witnesses and sought out those who hadn't given statements in 1998. 2 of these new witnesses became key to the case. One was Don's cousin, who said that on the night of the incident, her cousin had confessed to her that he was the one who tied Robbie to the tree with fishing net, doused him with gasoline, and set him on fire. This witness also mentioned that when she told another family member about this, they said the adults would handle everything. There was no doubt that this case had many legal issues, most related to Don being only 13 years old at the time of the crime. However, all involved in the case were determined to seek true justice for Robbie and his family, while preventing Don from continuing to walk free. In 2012, the prosecuting attorney requested the district court to allow Don to be tried as an adult. Of course, by then he was an adult, but I must emphasize again, he was not yet 18 when he committed the crime. In his official response, the district judge only noted that prosecutors have full discretion to consider juvenile cases as adult cases based on their own decision. However, he did not provide any specific conclusions regarding this case. Ultimately, the prosecutors decided to prosecute Don as an adult, based on Texas law passed in 1999, 1 year after the attack on Robbie. Before that, the minimum age for a juvenile to be considered an adult was 14, but under the new regulation, that age was lowered to 10. The prosecutor argued that since Robbie died in 2011, Don should be subject to the new law. On the other hand, Don's attorney argued that treating his client as an adult was illegal because the law changed a year after the attack. In other words, this meant Don should be held accountable under the law in effect in 1998. At the hearing to officially recognize Don as an adult, several witnesses were present and testified that he had personally confessed his crime to them. Finally, the judge concluded that Don must be treated as an adult and receive a harsher penalty for the murder or manslaughter of Robbie. After this ruling, the case was transferred to the district attorney's office due to the widespread public interest in the case, not only in 1998, when the main events occurred, but also throughout the civil trial. Don's attorney filed for a change of venue. The judge later approved this request, reasoning that the extensive media coverage could influence the jury's objectivity. As a result, the trial was moved to a neighboring county, creating logistical challenges for the prosecution's witnesses. Most of them, at least 40, were low-income, unable to take time off work, without personal transportation, and unable to afford living expenses in another city. However, with great effort, the representatives of the prosecution managed to arrange for most of the key witnesses to attend the trial. However, there was another issue. That was about 10 witnesses who had been in juvenile detention with Don in 1998, and at the time the trial began, all of them were still incarcerated at the Texas Department of Criminal Justice. Despite these obstacles, Don's trial commenced in 2015. Due to the complexity of the case, the prosecutors decided not to present the events in the usual chronological order. Contrary to the conventional method, they began with the testimony of one of Robbie's treating doctors, who spoke about Robbie's injuries, mental state, and the actual cause of his death. Since in the previous hearing, the judge had eliminated Don's confession regarding the attack on Robbie from the list of primary evidence, the prosecutors were forced to find alternative ways to present to the jury what had truly happened. Therefore, they used the video recording of Robbie's statement, which was extremely crucial to the case, as it confirmed that Don attacked Robbie to cover up another serious crime. Consequently, the jury watched the video several times, where Robbie recounted that the time the accused set him on fire was after humiliating him. The lead prosecutor understood that Don had set Robbie on fire to prevent him from revealing the other crime. Although Robbie had repeatedly mentioned hearing an adult man's voice at the time of the attack, authorities found no evidence of a second person present. And while all 12 jurors intently listened to Robbie's last statement, Don took on a defiant attitude by turning his back to the screen and reading a book. Immediately after, his attorney claimed that the prosecutors were deliberately exploiting the jury's emotions because they had no direct witnesses to the attack. Then, the prosecution called another witness, Don's cousin. She declared that the defendant had confessed to her that he was the perpetrator who attacked Robbie. Moreover, witnesses who had been detained with Don in juvenile detention in 1998 were also summoned to testify. All recounted the confessions Don had made while incarcerated. It should be noted that the prosecutors also mentioned other crimes Don had committed. Specifically, they referenced his assaults on a girl and a boy. On February 9, 2015, a jury consisting of 7 women and 5 men decided that Don Wilburn Collins, age 29, was guilty of murder and sentenced him to 40 years in prison. Upon hearing this verdict, Don showed no emotion. For her part, Colleen, Robbie's mother, declared that her son would be very pleased with this outcome, because Don would no longer be able to harm any other child. During the sentencing phase, she was also called to testify, speaking about her son and what her family had endured over the years. Although this sentence almost ensured that Don would spend the rest of his life in prison for Robbie's loved ones, it still wasn't enough. For the prosecutors and detectives involved in the case, all were satisfied with the verdict because after 17 years, justice had finally been served. However, Don's lead attorney claimed he believed the sentence was too harsh. Furthermore, he even appealed the decision of the trial court to allow his client to be tried as an adult for a crime committed as a minor. Additionally, he argued that during the trial, the prosecution relied solely on circumstantial evidence. According to him, they had no physical evidence or testimony proving the attack and molestation of Robbie. Despite all arguments and efforts by the defense, all 3 appeals courts upheld the conviction. The final judgment was delivered in October 2017, after all state-level appeals had been exhausted. There was a possibility that Don's attorney would appeal to the federal court. However, currently True Crime in the World has not found any information confirming this new appeal, and Don remains incarcerated in a high-security prison in Texas. He will be eligible for parole in 2033. Without a doubt, Robbie Middleton's story is a heartbreaking reminder of the potential for cruelty in humans, while also being a testament to the extraordinary strength and courage of a boy who never gave up and fought to the end. Robbie endured much pain in his attempt to return to a normal life, and ultimately he achieved justice, though the journey was incredibly arduous. Story 2. Located in central England, Manchester was once world-renowned for its textile industry, earning the title of the world's first industrialized city. Today, it still preserves numerous architectural structures from the Industrial Revolution era, while developing into a modern, diverse urban center. In the 1960s, Manchester and its surrounding areas were the scenes of several horrific crimes. Many teenagers between the ages of 10 and 17 went missing, with police investigations yielding no results. It wasn't until a witness came forward claiming to have personally witnessed a murder that the truth slowly began to unravel. It turned out that all the missing youths were connected to a husband and wife. Their crimes once shocked England, earning them the moniker the Manchester Moor Murderers. Thursday, October 7, 1965, at 6:10 a.m., the Hyde police station, 10 kilometers from central Manchester, received a distress call. The caller was a man named Smith, who stated that he had witnessed a murder. After receiving the report, the police immediately dispatched a patrol car to Wardlebrook Avenue, where Smith was located, and brought him to the station. Thereafter, he recounted everything he had seen. The person reporting the crime, named Smith, was 17 years old at the time and lived with his wife in the town of Hyde. His sister and brother-in-law also lived in the town, their houses being close enough to visit frequently. The night before, his sister Myra invited Smith to her house for drinks, so he followed her to their home. At the door, his sister asked him to wait outside until the lights inside were turned on. Smith found this odd, but complied. After his sister went inside and closed the door, the lights came on shortly after. Smith knocked to signal his presence, and his brother-in-law, Ian, opened the door, warmly inviting him in. Ian then led him to the kitchen, saying he would fetch some drinks from the living room, and asked him to stay there and not go out. Smith waited in the kitchen for about 2 minutes, when he heard a blood-curdling scream from the living room, followed by his brother-in-law calling for his help. He rushed to check. Upon entering the living room, he was stunned by the scene before him. He saw a strange young man lying next to the sofa, his head and shoulders propped against it, with his brother-in-law standing over him, an axe in hand, and shouting. Then his brother-in-law raised the axe above his head and struck the young man's shoulder with force. Frightened by such a sight, Smith's legs went weak, and he stood there dumbfounded. His brother-in-law then took out a rope and mercilessly put it around the boy's neck. During this, Ian accidentally sprained his ankle. After finishing, his brother-in-law calmly explained that the boy was too heavy to handle alone, so he needed Smith's help. He then wrapped the boy in a plastic bag, placed him in the bedroom, and planned to borrow Smith's daughter's pram the next day, to take the victim to be buried at Saddleworth Moor, 11 kilometers away. Smith, out of fear, couldn't disobey his brother-in-law, and had to assist. After dealing with the situation, he lied about going home to fetch the pram, and quickly left the scene. At 3 a.m., Smith returned home, and couldn't help but vomit, recalling the horrific scene. He then confided in his wife about what had happened. They discussed it all night, before deciding to report the crime to the police. After dawn, Smith went out, carrying 2 flick knives, for fear of his brother-in-law harming him, and ran to a nearby public phone booth to report the crime. After grasping the situation, the police immediately went to the crime scene, a secluded house at 16 Wardlebrook Avenue. They knocked on the door, and Myra, the homeowner, answered, saying she was alone. Once inside, the police quickly realized Myra had lied, because her husband Ian was sitting on the sofa, writing a leave application, telling his company he had injured his ankle and needed a few days off. The police used the pretext of investigating a firearms incident to request a search of their home. Myra vehemently denied any violence had occurred, but she still agreed to the search. The police discovered a suspiciously locked room in the house and asked Myra to open it. However, Myra claimed the key was elsewhere, not at home. Just as the police were about to continue questioning, Ian, who had been sitting on the sofa, suddenly spoke up, telling Myra to open the door. The locked room was a bedroom, and upon opening it, they indeed found an unresponsive teenager on the floor, wrapped in plastic with an electrical cord around his neck, matching Smith's account exactly. Faced with this situation, Ian didn't offer much explanation, but calmly got up to dress. He was arrested for murder, and his wife, Myra, was taken to the police station. Before leaving, she didn't forget to take their family dog with her. According to the investigation, the victim was named Evans, a 17-year-old apprentice engineer. Ian told the police that on the night of the crime, he met Evans at Manchester Central Station. They were strangers, but hit it off. The boy then followed him home. They not only drank together, but also had sexual relations. However, under the influence of alcohol, they got into an argument over trivial matters. During this, his brother-in-law, Smith, happened to come to their house, and together they attacked Evans. His wife, Myra, was not involved, only following his orders to help move the victim. The police were skeptical of this statement, and proceeded to interrogate Myra. She insisted that Evans's death was an accident. Her husband had acted unintentionally, and no one wanted this to happen. With no evidence directly linking Myra to the crime, after the interrogation ended, she was allowed to leave the station. In the following days, the police closely monitored Myra's every move. Upon returning home, Myra immediately burned a letter, leading police to suspect there was something incriminating in it. For days after the crime, a witness provided the police with a crucial clue. This person claimed to have seen Myra and Ian taking a teenager away from the central station on the day of the crime. With this testimony, the police also arrested Myra. The couple had claimed that Smith, Myra's brother, was involved in the crime, but the police found no evidence of his guilt or any motive for him to commit such an act. The police returned to the crime scene for further investigation. This time, they discovered an old exercise book with a page mentioning John Kilbride. Over the years, many children had gone missing in Manchester, including a 12-year-old boy named St. Johnston, which matched the name John Kilbride. The police suspected that this disappearance might be linked to the couple. Smith, the person who reported the crime, came back to the police with another important lead. He mentioned that his brother-in-law, Ian, had a suitcase full of items he never let anyone see, and he often wandered around Central Station, always carrying this suitcase. Based on this clue, 8 days after the crime, the police found the suitcase at the station's luggage deposit. Inside were various clothes, audio tapes, notebooks, and many photographs. Among them were 9 photos of a naked little girl. Using these photos, the police located the girl's mother, who confirmed her daughter's identity. She was 10-year-old Leslie Ann Downey, who had gone missing a year earlier. In the photos, the girl was unclothed, gagged with a scarf, evidently suffering greatly. The police played a 16-minute audio recording found in the suitcase. In one part, Downey's voice was heard, crying and screaming, pleading to go home. At this point, the police essentially confirmed that this couple was not only responsible for Evans's death, but also involved in Downey's disappearance, not ruling out the possibility of more victims. Clearly, this was a pair of serial killers who had been hiding for years. The police conducted a more thorough investigation into these 2 individuals. They spoke with neighbors, and one man provided a significant clue. He mentioned that he often saw Ian and Myra visiting Saddleworth Moor, their favorite spot where they would go whenever they had free time. They particularly enjoyed the scenery along the A635 road within the moor. The police speculated that Ian and Myra might have buried their victims there, especially since Smith, their brother-in-law, had mentioned this place before. Saddleworth Moor is part of the Pennines, characterized by rugged terrain covered with extensive peat bogs and low vegetation, known for its pristine natural landscape. 9 days after the crime, the police brought in search dogs to comb the area along the A635 on the moor. A short while later, the dogs detected an arm bone protruding from a peat bog. After examination, it was confirmed to be Downey's bone. Her mother identified her through the clothes found near the victim. In the days that followed, the police continued their search across the moor. Given its vast size, the search was like looking for a needle in a haystack, even with the help of search dogs. The police then had a new idea. They had previously found numerous photos in the suitcase, many with the moor as a backdrop, suggesting they might narrow down the search area based on these reference points. They showed these photos to residents near the moor, and with their help, based on a photo of Myra holding their pet dog, they pinpointed the location where the photo was taken. On the 5th day of the search, the police found a second victim buried in a shallow grave with the victim's clothes nearby. Through the identification by the boy's mother, it was confirmed that the clothes belonged to Kilbride, who had gone missing 2 years earlier. The search continued into November, but as temperatures dropped, they were forced to abandon the effort. Faced with evidence like the audio recordings and photos, Ian and Myra admitted to taking the sensitive photos of Downey, but denied killing her. They claimed 2 other men committed the heinous act, but didn't know their identities. The police were skeptical of this claim. To clarify the couple's motives, they investigated their backgrounds. Ian Brady was born in Glasgow. His mother was a tea room waitress who had him out of wedlock. It's said that his father died in an accident 3 months before Ian was born, with his identity unclear. After Ian's birth, his mother had to juggle her work while caring for him, the stress of life exhausting her. Additionally, her relationship with her family was poor, leaving her with almost no support. Some time later, feeling overwhelmed, she put up a notice in a shop window, seeking help to care for Ian. Eventually, a couple agreed to help. They already had 4 children, but were willing to look after Ian as part of their family. His mother was delighted. She worked at the tea room for £3 a week, and in return for their kindness, gave them £1 each week. Thanks to the help of this kind couple, Ian's mother left her job at the tea room and started working as a machine operator in a manufacturing plant. This job paid better, allowing her to have extra money to take Ian out. Despite the new family's attentive care, Ian struggled to fit in, seldom participating in family activities, living a closed-off life, appearing solitary and cold. In 1944, Ian's mother began dating a wealthy man who could have taken her to Australia. She excitedly shared this news with Ian, hoping he would join her, but he refused. Ian didn't want to live with a stranger, so his mother decided to stay in England with her son, giving up the opportunity to move to Australia and ending her relationship with her boyfriend. In 1947, at the age of 9, Ian moved with his foster parents to settle in Pollock. Here, he began to exhibit some extreme behaviors, starting to torment cats and dogs, throwing stones at them, and even decapitating them to show off to friends. During high school, Ian's behavior worsened. He was arrested twice for burglary. Being underage, he wasn't severely punished. His foster parents were deeply disappointed in him and ceased to care about his affairs. In 1953, at 15 years old, Ian dropped out of school and entered the workforce. He worked as a tea boy at Harland and Wolff shipyard in Govan. However, he loathed this job, and later, he switched to being a delivery boy for a butcher shop. During this time, he met and dated a girl named Evelyn Grant. When he found out she danced with another man, he flew into a rage, pulling out a penknife to threaten her. Consequently, he was arrested, receiving a suspended sentence, and was required to live with his biological mother. At this point, his biological mother had settled in Manchester and started a new family with an Irish fruit merchant named Patrick Brady. His stepfather found Ian a job as a fruit porter. Ian tried to integrate into his new family, even changing his surname to match his stepfather's. Despite having stable employment, he didn't become more virtuous. Soon after, he was arrested again for theft. Being a minor, he was sent to a reform school. In 1957, at 19 years old, Ian was released. After returning home, he seemed like a different person, starting to study mathematics, borrowing books from the library, and studying for hours each day. His mother felt comforted by this change, believing he was finally on the right path. 2 years later, Ian was hired as an office worker at Millwood's Merchandising, where he then worked. Colleagues described him as quiet and hot-tempered, often sitting alone at work reading books about Nazi crimes, and in his free time, he liked to ride his motorcycle to Saddleworth Moor. In 1961, at the age of 23, Ian met his current wife, Myra, at the company where they both worked. Although Myra was dating another man at the time, she detailed in her diary her fascination with Ian. Because Ian was quiet, it took 6 months before they spoke to each other. In the following months, their relationship grew closer, and they began dating. After getting married, they moved into a house in the town of Hyde, until her brother-in-law, Smith, reported them. Myra Hindley was born into a working-class family in Crumsell, living in a slum from an early age, in a squalid environment, sharing a bed with her parents. Her father had served in the paratroopers during World War II, was tough, and after being discharged, became an alcoholic, frequently drunk and abusive. Myra grew up in an atmosphere of violence and fear. In 1946, with the birth of her sister, Maureen Smith, the family's living conditions worsened. At 4 years old, Myra was sent to live with her grandmother, whose house was not far away, allowing Myra to visit home whenever she wanted. Each time she returned, her father would teach her how to fight others, constantly emphasizing that she must be tough and never cry, no matter what. If bullied, she must retaliate. At 8, Myra had a conflict with a neighbor boy who scratched her face. She went home crying for comfort, but was harshly scolded by her father. He demanded she fight back, threatening further punishment if she didn't. Feeling helpless, Myra found the boy and punched him, knocking him down. Her father's volatile temperament deeply influenced Myra, making her selfish and cold. Once, she witnessed her best friend drown in a pool and didn't move to help. In 1959, at 17, Myra got engaged but quickly called it off, reasoning that her fiancé was immature and couldn't provide the life she wanted. Afterwards, she worked while learning judo, where many avoided her because she often injured her teammates during practice. 2 years later, at 19, Myra started working as a typist at Millwood's Merchandising and immediately fell for the quiet Ian. After they began dating, Ian would take her to see violent movies and read books on Nazi crimes together. Colleagues recounted that they would read these books aloud during lunch breaks. To their coworkers, they were oddballs, so few wanted to be near them. At the same time, Myra began changing her appearance. She dyed her hair blonde, wore bright red lipstick, and her clothing style changed significantly, adopting high boots, short skirts, and leather jackets, outfits considered bold and provocative at the time, but Myra didn't care. After the crime was exposed, one of Myra's close friends went to the police, saying that Myra had written to her about Ian drugging her and mentioning that Ian had psychological issues, possibly leading to extreme behaviors. The friend advised Myra to leave Ian soon, but Myra didn't listen. Sometime later, Myra wrote another letter, asking her friend to destroy the previous one, threatening to cut ties if she didn't. Though puzzled, the friend complied. Since then, Myra had no further contact with her. Myra's violent tendencies might stem from her father's influence. After meeting Ian, she was gradually brainwashed by him, accepting his extremist views and distorted values, leading her to commit crimes. The police meticulously analyzed the photos from the suitcase, noting that in many of the pictures taken on the moor, both individuals appeared with a dog. This was their pet dog named Puppet. After Ian's arrest, Myra even wanted to bring the dog to the police station. They called in a veterinarian to examine the dog, trying to determine the year the photos were taken based on its age. Unfortunately, after the examination, the dog didn't wake up from anesthesia, and the results were of no help to the investigation. Myra was furious upon learning this, criticizing the police for causing her pet's death. This was the first time she showed emotion since her arrest. Before, she had always remained calm. A year after the crime, the trial took place at Chester Crown Court. Defendants Ian and Myra were charged with 3 counts of murder each, along with other charges. The Smiths also appeared in court as witnesses. In court, neither defendant admitted guilt. Ian insisted he had only struck Evans with an axe, but did not directly kill him. And for the other 2 victims, he claimed ignorance of their deaths. Myra stated that the photos found in the suitcase taken on the moor were taken randomly without knowing they were burial sites. She just liked to go there to enjoy the scenery and had harmed no one. Both appeared extremely composed in court, as if the matter was unrelated to them. The court played the audio recording of victim Downey, where Ian and Myra's voices could clearly be heard. Ian was also heard using vulgar language towards the victim. Ian claimed he was yelling at Downey out of fear her screams would attract neighbors' attention. Myra stated that when Ian was undressing Downey, she was outside admiring the view, unaware of what was happening, and she didn't know what transpired afterward. After reviewing the case, the jury reached a unanimous decision, sentencing Ian to life imprisonment for 3 counts of murder. Myra was sentenced to life for 2 counts of murder and an additional 7 years for obstructing justice. After the trial, the judge publicly stated that these murders were heinous, describing the defendants as extremely depraved killers, hoping they would spend the rest of their lives in prison repenting. Once released, they could pose a danger to society again. Ian was sent to Durham Prison, while Myra was sent to Holloway Women's Prison. The case shocked public opinion once exposed. Through newspaper articles, their crimes became a hot topic for discussion. Tabloids to garner attention linked them to other disappearances in the Manchester area, causing even more uproar. Under public pressure, the police were forced to investigate these cases to determine any connection to the couple. From 1966 to 1985, the police investigated numerous disappearances, mobilizing a significant amount of personnel, but found no evidence linking these cases to the duo. In 1985, a journalist interviewed Ian in prison, uncovering a clue. Ian revealed that a year before his arrest, he had killed a 12-year-old boy named Bennett and buried him on the moor. In reality, the police had long suspected Ian because Bennett and Downey disappeared in the same year, and Bennett lived near Ian's home. The police tried to interrogate Ian, but he was aggressive and refused to answer any questions. They had no choice but to return to Saddleworth Moor to search, but to no avail. For months later, in her kitchen, Bennett's mother wrote a letter to Myra in prison, pleading for information about what happened to her son. Perhaps moved by the letter's content, Myra agreed to help locate Bennett. In December 1986, Myra assisted the police for the first time in searching the moor. She relied on her memory to guide the police to several locations, but ultimately nothing was found. 2 months later, Myra officially admitted involvement in 5 murders, revealing that Ian had falsely accused Smith and recounting the entire process of the crimes. Since being with Ian, Myra had studied ways to commit crimes daily. Gradually, The two were no longer satisfied with petty theft, but wanted to execute a perfect murder. On July 12, 1963, after work, they began looking for a target on the streets, and a 16-year-old girl named Pauline Reed caught their eye. Myra, driving a borrowed van, lured Reed to Saddleworth Moor to help find an expensive lost glove. Reed innocently believed her, getting into the van. Ian followed on his motorcycle. At the moor, they took Reed to a secluded spot, assaulted her, then killed her with a flick knife. After the deed, Myra returned to the van while Ian stayed to bury the body. After this crime, they felt extremely excited, and the police had no suspicion of them. For months later, they repeated their actions, this time targeting 12-year-old Kilbride. He was lured to the moor to help find a glove, and was killed there. After the crime, Ian took a photo of Myra, which later became a crucial clue for the afternoon in 1964. Their next victim, 12-year-old Bennett, met his end and was also buried on the moor. 6 months later, they spotted Downey at a playground, took her home to assault her, recording the entire ordeal on tape. After Downey's death, they took her body to the moor for burial. The more crimes they committed, the more reckless they became. In October 1965, they targeted 17-year-old Evans at Manchester Central Station, luring him back to their home with sweet talk. However, since Evans was strong, they feared he might resist and escape, so they called Myra's brother-in-law, Smith, for help. They didn't anticipate that Smith would report them to the police. Ian harbored deep resentment and falsely accused Smith of participating in the crime. After Myra confessed, the police brought a 17-hour recording of her confession to Ian in prison. Upon learning that Myra had confessed, Ian also decided to admit his guilt, but he had a condition. After everything was settled, he should be allowed to end his life, which the police refused. In March 1987, Myra returned to Saddleworth Moor to cooperate with police in searching for Bennett and Reed. After 4 months of searching, they finally found Reed buried in a 0.9-meter deep hole, just 90 meters from where Downey was discovered. When Ian learned that Myra was helping the police locate the victims, he ultimately confessed to the 5 murders and was taken to the moor to assist in the search. However, he had long forgotten the exact locations. After the search concluded, Ian wrote a letter to a television station. Surprisingly, in the letter, he admitted to involvement in 5 more murders. Upon receiving this information, the TV station immediately informed the police, but due to a lack of related evidence, the investigation couldn't proceed. Myra claimed she knew nothing about these additional crimes. Ian, who had been diagnosed with mental illness while imprisoned at Durham Prison, was later moved to a psychiatric hospital for treatment. During conversations with a psychologist, he made it clear that he never wanted to be released, stating that he committed the crimes out of despair with life, merely to release his emotions. The police continued searching for Bennett for decades, employing significant manpower and resources, but to no avail. Bennett became the only one of the 5 victims whose body was never found, forever lying in that desolate land. In 1999, Ian's right arm was broken. He claimed that hospital staff had attacked him without reason for an hour, but no one cared about his suffering. He went on a hunger strike in protest, but was eventually force-fed. Myra was diagnosed with angina, an aortic aneurysm, and other health issues. After treatment in the hospital, she died in 2002. There were rumors that nearly 20 funeral homes refused to cremate her, and eventually a remote one took her in, but her family did not attend. In 2012, Ian ended his treatment and returned to prison. He went on another hunger strike in protest and was sent back to a psychiatric hospital. In May 2017, at 79 years old, Ian died in the hospital from lung disease. His ashes were scattered at sea, concluding a life of crime. Compared to Ian, Myra showed more positive behavior after imprisonment, continuously appealing to reduce her sentence. When she first went to prison, she often wrote to Ian, but over time, she gradually forgot him and even fell in love with a prison guard. During her numerous appeals, Myra succeeded in changing her status from Category A to Category B prisoner, allowing her occasional supervised walks in the desolate outskirts near the prison. But Myra didn't stop there. She secretly planned an escape, and with the help of another inmate, managed to replicate the prison gate key. Just as she was about to make the key, a patrolling guard noticed the anomaly, and her escape plan failed. After Myra's death, the prison guard boyfriend she had met in prison took her ashes and scattered them in a park 10 kilometers from Saddleworth Moor. Some media reported that the park became a place people avoided. This couple left an impression of being born evil in people's minds, becoming symbols for serial killers and child molesters. A photo of Myra taken after her arrest was widely circulated, with many likening her image to Medusa from mythology, considered a symbol of evil, becoming the darkest part of that era. Story 3. This is a film, and this is reality. Today we delve into a true story, a dark chapter in South Korean history that few might know about. It's like a film, but it's a harsh reality, a truth buried for decades, only recently brought to light. In South Korea, there existed a concentration camp, likened to a genocide disaster or a real-life Squid Game. This story was only publicized and stirred public outrage thanks to this famous documentary, which led to a search for victims who had been silent for over 25 years. You'll be shocked to learn that places you might think were only heard of during World War II and Auschwitz, the concentration and extermination camp complex, also occurred in South Korea. This is Jung, a 12-year-old boy in 1982. He was just a child, very smart, bright at school. In exams, he always ranked first, or at least second, a good listener, and even knew how to care for and cook for his ailing mother. Something rare for a 12-year-old to do. But he did it because he was the only son in the family, and he was all his family had. But one day in 1982, when it was late and Jung hadn't returned home, it turned out Jung had gone to a nearby city with a neighbor. And naturally, at 12, going to the city, the boy was enchanted by many things. There was a lot of food and many interesting sights. He spent the whole day in a game room, and it was a wonderful day for him until the neighbor left him alone for a moment, and 2 police officers approached, asking him, "Why are you here? Are you alone?" The police officer told him, "Come with us to the police station. We'll take you home." And naturally, as an innocent 12-year-old, thinking these were police officers, he could trust them. He followed them to the police station. He didn't know that this would change his life forever. From then on, children occasionally went missing, disappearing without a trace. And here's Lee. In 1983, she was just 7 years old. While she and her brother were outside, once again, the police approached them and they followed. After a few hours at the police station, the police said they would take her and her brother home. And just as the 2 children left the police station, a white van was waiting. And from this van, it really reminds us of the movie. Because in the film, you have these secret vans that take people away and they vanish without a trace. These children were then forced onto this dark van without explanation. And they realized they weren't alone. There were many other children and adults being crammed into this small van. When they arrived at this mysterious location, hell began. Of course, if not all, then many of the children were screaming, crying and telling them, "Where am I? I want to go home." But as soon as you cry, ask or complain, the guards would start using force cruelly on these children. When they entered this mysterious building, victims described it as truly like a prison cell. There were heavy steel doors that could only be locked from the outside. And inside these long rooms were rows and rows of bunk beds. It was enough to house at least 80 to 100 people. Once again, do you see a bit of coincidence? Even more astonishing, they noticed everyone was wearing the same uniform. And the uniform color was blue with stripes. They were also forced to shave their heads bald. No one was allowed long hair. And they were stripped of their names and identities. Now they were called by numbers. They had to respond to the officers' commands as if they were in the military. There was also a hierarchy, like in the military. A woman, who was only 7 when she was taken, even remembered there were children younger than her. After changing clothes, they went to sleep. Of course, I'm sure no one could sleep well that night. And at exactly 5 a.m., the alarm started ringing. People started going outside. Of course, Jung and the new children, they were not told what to do. And they just had to follow what everyone else was doing. Those who were there before them. When they went out, the new children, the newcomers, were shocked to see they were not alone here. There were thousands of people in identical uniforms standing outside, and they had to form a specific line. They realized it wasn't just children, but also adults, including the elderly. And here are some actual images of these camps. It's like stepping out of a horror movie. Rows and rows of identical buildings. These buildings are also surrounded by high concrete walls. And above all, even if you tried to escape, there would be guards standing watch, securing the entire area. This is an isolated area. Once again, it reminds me of Squid Game, how that specific location was hidden in the woods. These areas were very deeply concealed. and you would really need to hunt or know the well to find this place. The crazy thing is, this area is like a small town. It has everything from factories, churches, schools, to barbershops, and even bathing areas. And of course, later, we will know this wasn't the only location. There were several different locations across South Korea. When there were orders, these people would immediately salute, sing certain songs. And of course, the newcomers, they were not instructed what to do. If they didn't follow or didn't know what to do, they would be beaten immediately. They didn't care why you couldn't keep up with the others, or if you decided to resist. There would be severe punishments. One man said they were only given 30 toothbrushes for 120 people to share. They also received one set of clothes to wear for the whole year. Now, the daily tasks of these people were forced labor, almost all day. There were many facilities and factories. And you see these photos. These children were barbers. And one of the factories where Jung worked was for fishing rod production. He and many others were forced to work for many hours. At the end of the day, if you didn't meet the production quota they set, everyone would be punished severely. Jung remembered his body covered in blood, old scabs repeatedly cut due to punishments. And this happened every day. This was hell for everyone. They were also given very little food, and everyone became emaciated. Some even had to eat whatever they could find, including rats. Now, there was also an area for women. And it was horrific. There were many instances of abuse. Even more terrifying was when women got pregnant. Doctors would come and inject them with unknown substances. And the witnesses said that suddenly, within days, the pregnant women would no longer have their babies. And the abuse didn't just happen to women, it happened to men too. These are drawings of what the victims remember experiencing. And the details of what these victims endured are too horrific. So what is this place? Where is this hell? Why were all these people gathered here? Was it really for entertainment or games? And why did no one know about it or try to save these people? It turns out, this place is called the Brothers' Home, a welfare facility. It was supposed to gather homeless people, those with nowhere to go, no family, or those considered unfit for society. It was a government program for these people, like giving them a second chance, taking them off the streets, including the disabled, and bringing them into this welfare center, where they supposedly would have work, education, church attendance, and meals. It was advertised on television as a wonderful place where the government gave the homeless a second chance. But the truth is, 70% of those brought to these camps were not homeless. They were random people whom the police or anyone could just force into the place. This is Mr. Choi. He was taken when he was 14, and he remembers the guards abusing them in front of everyone. Like these guards didn't care, because this happened in front of everyone during the time they were supposed to sleep. He said it was like a wild animal hunt there. There was no humanity at all, and many had tried to escape. But they said that in reality, almost no one could escape because eventually the guards would catch them. And soon after, they would find out that their friend, who tried to escape the day before, would never return, because the punishment was often their life. The saddest thing to hear from victims like Mr. Young is that all this happened to him, especially the abuse. He said he felt ashamed for going through this, when it was completely not his fault. What about the disabled who were brought there? What happened to them? Witnesses said there was an area for the disabled, and they considered this truly a zombie area. They literally called it the zombie area, because the disabled were kept drugged. All of them were in a zombie-like state, and they were completely unable to take care of themselves. 2 years passed like that, and Young was now 14. Surprisingly, one day, he saw a very familiar face from a distance, his own father. This meant that the parents of children like Young, when their children suddenly disappeared, were devastated. Young's father said he had gone to the police station many times, begging to find his son. But guess what? The police, seeing Young's father drunk and yelling, automatically considered him unfit for society, and forced him into this camp. And here is Young, now over 50, speaking about this for the first time. He admits that he felt happy to see his father there, but immediately after, he felt embarrassed and ashamed. Especially seeing his father age so quickly in just a short time. Due to exhaustion, the once vigorous father seemed no more. When no one was looking, Young's father found his son, and actually gave him an old rice cake he had saved. This rice cake was given during the Korean New Year, and each person was only given one. So the hungry father had saved this for his son. Amid the brutal suffering in this hellish place, these unfortunate people had to suppress their human emotions. But for most people here, that humanity was never truly stripped away. One of the most perverse aspects is that this welfare center was advertised as a place of God's grace. The owner, the master of this place, and many others were described as praying and believing in the Bible. They were forced to sing hymns and church choir songs. These victims said they were taught that this was what God had commanded, so they were truly brainwashed in every possible way. And using religion in the name of God and the Bible to perpetrate these horrors is one of the most disturbing things that people cannot forget. It was in December 1986 when Mr. Kim, who was working as a prosecutor, was on a day off and decided to go hunting. While walking through the forest with a colleague to find prey, he suddenly saw some people in the distance, and he noticed something extremely strange about their interactions. Besides these workers, he saw guards with long sticks and whips abusing them. There were also large, unleashed dogs intentionally intimidating all these workers. A while later, he noticed the workers being led into what looked like a large animal pen, and the guards would lock the heavy gates from the outside. He also noticed that some workers had their legs chained to prevent escape. Mr. Kim had a very bad feeling and decided to investigate this area. During the investigation of this specific area, it was discovered that there were about 900 children in forced labor, along with over 3,000 others living in horrific conditions. Finally, Mr. Kim found the office of the head of the facility, and he discovered this huge cash box or container with over $20 million in cash. The head of the welfare center was a man named Park. Now when Mr. Park was interrogated by Mr. Kim, he behaved extremely arrogantly, refusing to speak to the police. He even declared that he couldn't be investigated because he was appointed to this welfare program by one of the highest officials in the government. Therefore, he seemed somewhat untouchable. When Mr. Park was appointed to this position, the government provided him with a lot of money to run this program. Each person he brought in was equivalent to a guaranteed payment. Additionally, all the labor they did, like making fishing rods, any type of factory where all these people worked, the revenue went to him. I mean, Mr. Park's word and anything he directed was the law here. And from this moment, things started to get even worse. The government learned in 1981 that the next Olympics would be held in South Korea, and decided to begin the process of cleaning up or beautifying South Korea. From here, the police of this country started the cleanup. Police officers were often rewarded based on how many people they rounded up, thus motivating them to zealously capture people. There were truly no homeless or orphans on the streets. Mr. Kim, as an honest investigator, was shocked when he received a call from high-ranking officials demanding he reduce Mr. Park's sentence. These were his own high-ranking officials, his superiors, who told him to do this. So he had no choice. But it was at this moment that he lost faith in the judicial system, because he saw that people with money and power, especially those favored by the president, could easily escape punishment despite committing such horrific crimes. During the 1970s to 1980s, the president of South Korea was Chun Doo-hwan. President Chun caused a lot of controversy. He was accused of personally committing numerous heinous crimes against the people. There was even a significant riot in South Korea protesting his dictatorship. We won't delve into this issue, but he was a very controversial president. Eventually, Mr. Park was convicted, but most of the charges were dismissed. He only served about 2.5 years in prison for the horrific crimes against these victims. In 1987, when all this news came out, the camps were shut down. But since this was a government-run program, they handled it by just changing the name and location and starting over. Mr. Jung, upon learning he was about to be transferred to another location, received a call saying his father had died in this camp. No one knew why he died, but clearly it was believed he passed away due to exhaustion and horrific abuse. This concentration camp lasted about 12 years, and in total there were 38,437 victims of this incident. After these concentration camps were almost closed around 1988, once again they changed and continued the programs under different names and locations. It was said that such brutality had ceased, but there are reports suggesting that even later they still endured unfair treatment. The reason these people couldn't speak out until recently is due to stigma. They felt as though they would always be treated as unfit and labeled that way forever. And this was true because many of these victims who spoke up after the welfare program shut down in the late 80s said they couldn't return home. Many of them were taken when they were very young. They could no longer find their parents. They had to stay in other facilities, either for the homeless or orphanages. And many had to be admitted to mental health institutions because throughout the abuse, drugging, and all the trauma they experienced, many children did not develop into fully functional healthy adults. There was one man who came to the camp with his sister. He was fortunate to be okay, but his sister became disabled after all the horrific beatings. It wasn't until 2012, 15 years after the incident, that one by one, survivors from this camp stood before the court, finally mustering the courage to protest and seek justice. Initially, Mr. Hahn was the first to speak out about this, and he was truly like a lone protester outside the courthouse, quoting him, "I am 37 years old now, but the story I am telling is for my 9-year-old self. The most important thing we are seeking is to regain normality." Unfortunately, the courts or the police, anyone saying that the statute of limitations had long passed, couldn't do anything. Moreover, Mr. Park, who should have been held accountable, passed away in 2016. Here is an image of Mr. Park before his death, and many documentary crews tried to interview him or get answers from him, but unfortunately he was very weak. It seemed he had memory loss. He couldn't remember everything, and he was just like a frail old man. They couldn't interview. It's said that until Mr. Park died, he lived like a very wealthy man. With the money earned from the welfare program, he bought many buildings. To protest, the victims camped outside the court for over 900 days. For about 3 years, they camped outside to be heard. It wasn't until 2020 that the court finally agreed to reinvestigate the brothers' home welfare case from the 70s and 80s, and once again, until today, the victims have not received any compensation or support from the government, and they believe they should because the program they were unjustly placed into was government-run, and the cruel individuals who did these horrific things to them are still living freely without any punishment. This is one of the reasons these victims feel very angry. When they were children, they couldn't resist, and even as they grew up, they couldn't protect themselves or seek justice. Story 4. On a quiet late night, along a winding, desolate highway, a car raced like a bullet and smashed into a building by the roadside. Debris flew everywhere, and the car was reduced to a twisted heap of metal. Inside were 3 people. 2 died instantly, and the survivor was in critical condition. A sudden car accident had shattered the hopes of 3 families. Initially, everyone thought it was just a tragic accident. However, as the investigation progressed, chilling details began to surface. What seemed like an accidental crash was hiding a meticulously planned crime. So, what really happened that year? Let's turn back the clock to 2022 to explore this bizarre incident. Today's story unfolds in Ohio, in the Midwest of the United States. This state holds significant political importance in the U.S., with a population of nearly 11.8 million, making it the 7th most popular state. Around 5:30 a.m. on July 31st, 2022, in Strongsville, a suburb of Cleveland, Ohio, a loud explosion suddenly tore through the night. A black Toyota Camry, speeding excessively, crashed straight into the building of Pride One Construction. With just one loud boom, the car was nearly obliterated. About 45 minutes later, passers-by discovered the accident and immediately alerted the police. Police, firefighters, and paramedics quickly arrived at the scene to witness the devastation. The car was completely wrecked, almost split in two, with 3 unconscious youths inside. The driver was a beautiful young girl, injured in her limbs, her body trapped under the dashboard. In the passenger seat was a young man with a head injury, his face covered in blood. The other young man in the back seat had severe injuries to his abdomen and thighs. During the rescue, the police felt immense sorrow seeing the car totally destroyed, with little hope for survivors. But surprisingly, when they deflated the airbags, they found the girl in the driver's seat still breathing faintly, so she was rushed to the hospital. The 2 young men were not so fortunate. After identification, the 3 were Mackenzie Sharilla, age 17, Dominic Russo, age 20, and Davian Flanagan, age 19. They were not only close friends, but also quite popular in school. Mackenzie, born on August 2, 2004 in Strongsville, possessed an enchanting beauty, sweet and beloved by her peers. In high school, she often received romantic confessions and was the goddess in many boys' hearts. Dominic was Mackenzie's boyfriend, enthusiastic, open, and loved playing basketball. He had a flair for fashion, regularly designing and making beautiful clothes for his girlfriend. He was planning to start his own fashion brand. The couple met in school and had been dating for over 4 years, moving in together at Dominic's house by late 2021. Dominic's mother was very pleased with her future daughter-in-law, even preparing a home for the 2 of them. Davian was Dominic's best friend. Handsome, energetic, passionate about volleyball and football, previously the captain of the school's football team with many female fans. He ran a barbershop and had established a professional styling team. These three young people were exceptionally talented and full of life. They should have had bright futures, but unexpectedly, in just one night, all their beauty turned to dust. Mackenzie, after emergency treatment, temporarily escaped critical condition. Later, Paul, a mutual friend, provided clues to the police. Around 11 p.m. on July 30th, they came to my place to hang out, listen to music, watch TV, have a feast, and even smoked marijuana. I got tired and fell asleep. They must have left around 4 or 5 a.m. I never imagined they would encounter such a horrific accident on their way home. The police found 8.1 grams of magic mushrooms and some marijuana in the wreckage of the crashed car. The medical examiner also detected marijuana in Dominic and Davian's systems, and magic mushrooms were found in Mackenzie's shirt pocket. All this indicated that they had used banned substances before the accident. The accident site was at the intersection of Progress Drive and Alameda Drive. Progress Drive, built with concrete in its early years, has deteriorated significantly, full of potholes and sharp turns. The speed limit on this stretch is 56 kilometers per hour, but the speed limit signs are placed in obscured locations, making them hard to see. The police stated that the maximum safe driving speed here is 87 kilometers per hour, and drivers must grip the steering wheel tightly to avoid losing control. Exceeding this speed could risk flipping the car. Combined with initial clues, the police inferred that at the time of the accident, it was still dark and Mackenzie, under the influence of banned substances, wasn't mentally alert, likely losing control due to excessive speed. In other words, this was an accident. However, when extracting surveillance footage from nearby stores and streets, the police saw something strange. The video clearly showed that initially, the car's speed wasn't high, and it took the turn slowly, but right after passing the curve and nearing the building, it suddenly accelerated, which was highly unusual. Concurrently, experts analyzing the car's black box discovered some odd details. Firstly, before crashing into the building, the car continued to accelerate, reaching 156 kilometers per hour in mere seconds, with no use of the brakes. The police went specifically to Toyota to check for performance issues with the car. The company confirmed regular maintenance, no malfunctions, and subsequent checks on the braking, accelerator, gas pedals, etc. all functioned normally, with no uncontrolled acceleration or brake failure. So the question arises, why did Mackenzie floor the accelerator instead of the brake? Secondly, in the last moment before the crash, the steering wheel swerved left, then suddenly 142 degrees to the right. This sharp turn caused the car to lose control completely and crash into the building. Lastly, within the 4.7 seconds before impact, the gear shifted between neutral, N, and drive, D. These clues made what seemed like a normal accident highly suspicious, suggesting it was not just a traffic accident, but part of an elaborate plot. To clarify the truth, the police visited Mackenzie in the hospital to inquire about the specifics of the accident. However, what surprised everyone was her claim of not remembering anything about the crash. Upon hearing the news of her friends' deaths, she burst into tears, nearly collapsing. Psychologists suggested this could be a form of post-traumatic stress disorder, where, under immense shock, individuals might choose amnesia to protect themselves. The only witness with amnesia left the case at a standstill. Just as the police were puzzled, an offhand comment from one of Dominic's friends caught their attention. Lately, Mackenzie and Dominic were constantly arguing about breaking up, causing chaos at home. This accident finally separated them. Could this accident be related to their relationship issues? To find more clues, the police decided to delve deeper into this matter. The police went from one family to the other for statements, only to receive completely different accounts. Mackenzie's mother said, "The relationship between my daughter and Dominic was very good. They were about to get married, and there was never any talk of breaking up." But Dominic's mother told a different story. For the last 6 months, their relationship was awful. They fought at the slightest provocation, and sometimes even came to blows. Mackenzie was very possessive. If Dominic even spoke to another woman, she would make a scene. Especially in July, they had a fierce argument, and the conflict escalated. Dominic recorded the entire argument on his phone. It ended with both of them in disagreement. Dominic's mother added that on July 17th, Dominic called her, saying he was arguing with Mackenzie on Interstate 71. She asked her friend Martin to go help. On the way, Martin called Dominic to confirm the location and heard Mackenzie screaming beside him, "If they dare come here, I'll crash the car." When Martin arrived, he saw the two fighting inside the car. Later, Dominic, heartbroken, said he couldn't handle Mackenzie's possessiveness and planned to end their relationship decisively. At the time, everyone thought Mackenzie's threat to crash the car was just said in the heat of the moment. But when combined with her action of flooring the accelerator without braking during the accident, her words seemed to carry a deeper meaning. Dominic's brother also mentioned that his brother and Mackenzie would break up and get back together. But by July, Dominic had clearly stated he wanted to end the relationship completely. The medical staff who treated Mackenzie said that after she woke up in the hospital, she blamed herself and seemed remorseful and in distress. She even said, "It should have been me who died." Thus, it's very possible she was pretending to have amnesia. Gathering all this information, the police elevated the case from a traffic accident to a criminal investigation. But with limited evidence, they could only use manual methods and secretly monitor Mackenzie. On August 6, 2022, Mackenzie texted Dominic's brother, "Can you go to Dominic's room, take some photos of us, and put them in his so he can be with me forever?" On August 8th, the day Dominic was buried, Mackenzie posted, "I love you, my darling. I'll always remember you." On August 24th, she posted a photo of her and Dominic at Universal Studios with the caption, "I miss you. Sometimes I feel like you'll come back any moment. You'd walk in, look at me, and I'd see your smile." Later, she messaged Dominic's mother, "I only remember after the turn. Everything went black, and I remember nothing. I'm going crazy. I promise if I remember anything, I'll tell you." Throughout August, she posted many pictures with her boyfriend, accompanied by heartfelt words. These emotional posts once made the police think Mackenzie was just a pitiful girl who had lost her love and was in deep sorrow, leading them to consider dropping the surveillance. However, not long after, her image changed completely by 180 degrees. After leaving the hospital, Mackenzie quickly returned to normal life. She got a job at a modeling agency in Los Angeles, then posted celebration photos of Halloween and concert attendance on social media. In the photos, Mackenzie looked radiant and full of life, starkly different from before. This significant emotional shift caught the police off guard, prompting them to monitor her more closely. After secret investigations, the police discovered Mackenzie was a child spoiled by her parents, getting everything she wanted, which had shaped her domineering personality. At 15, Mackenzie had contemplated ending her life just because her parents didn't meet her demands. At that time, the police recommended psychological treatment, but her parents laughed it off, considering it teenage impulsiveness. To date, Mackenzie's psychological issues remain unresolved and have only worsened. Moreover, Mackenzie had been using banned substances for a long time. She even publicly declared on social media, "I'm the kind of girl who can handle any amount of substances without issue." Clearly, she had problems. After a prolonged period of surveillance and investigation, the police finally uncovered crucial evidence. GPS data from Mackenzie's phone showed that 2 days before the accident, on July 28th, she had been near the crash site. This was highly suspicious. The road where the accident occurred was remote, bumpy, and long deteriorated, not one they typically used to return home. Therefore, the police believed that Mackenzie's visit 2 days earlier might have been to scout the location, deliberately choosing that secluded road. All this suggested the crash was a meticulously planned assassination. Mackenzie wanted to use this extreme method to resolve her relationship with her boyfriend. She was indeed a lunatic. After learning these details, the police arrested Mackenzie and charged her with 12 counts, including murder. In court, the prosecution presented evidence one by one. Although there were no direct witnesses, the surveillance footage from the accident scene, the phone's GPS data, the car's accelerator settings before the crash, and witness statements verifying the severe conflicts between Mackenzie and Dominic, all this indirect evidence formed a complete chain. However, when faced with the overwhelming evidence, Mackenzie showed indifference, sometimes fixing her hair or looking at her nails as if none of this concerned her. A body language expert analyzed her hair over her face. Pale skin make her look very vulnerable, but inside she's incredibly strong. She's certain she won't be punished. The expert was spot on, because right after the case broke, Mackenzie casually remarked, "At worst, you'll take away my license for 10 years. Keep in mind, this was about 2 lives, yet she didn't seem to care. In response to the prosecution's accusations, Mackenzie's mother vigorously defended her daughter, stating that Mackenzie suffered from postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome, POTS, where upon onset, blood pressure drops and heart rate increases, leading to loss of consciousness. At the time of the accident, Mackenzie had fainted, which is why her foot stayed on the accelerator. However, this argument was quickly dismissed. The prosecutor pointed out that when applying for her driver's license, Mackenzie did not declare any health issues. Furthermore, at the accident scene, there were clear signs like the steering wheel being turned, gear shifts, and the car experiencing violent collisions off the road. Yet, her foot remained unnaturally on the accelerator, something an unconscious person couldn't do. The defense argued that one couldn't rely solely on surveillance video, GPS, and car settings to convict Mackenzie. They posited that Mackenzie herself could have died in such a collision, suggesting it wasn't safe for her either. However, the prosecution countered that the surveillance footage clearly showed Mackenzie's intent. She had previously scouted the accident area, choosing the time of 5:30 a.m., when it was still dark, to drive into a remote, poorly maintained road. This location was nearly devoid of traffic and hard to reach for rescue, making it an ideal spot for Mackenzie to execute her dark plan. The prosecutor emphasized that even if Mackenzie had suicidal intentions, it wouldn't lessen her culpability. Another critical detail the prosecutor brought up was Mackenzie's birth date, August 2, 2004. This meant that at the time of the crime, she was 2 days shy of turning 18. Was this just a coincidence? The prosecution believed Mackenzie deliberately chose this timing to exploit her status as a minor to avoid harsher penalties. However, considering the severe consequences of the crime, which resulted in 2 deaths, the court decided not to transfer the case to juvenile court, but to try her as an adult. Perhaps to gain the judge's sympathy, Mackenzie gave a heartfelt final statement. "I am deeply sorry to Dominic and Davian's families. I hope one day you'll understand that I never wanted this to happen and didn't do it intentionally. I wish I could remember everything that happened. I am truly sorry. My heart is broken and Dominic was my love. I wish I could bear all the pain for everyone." Before the final verdict, the courtroom atmosphere was extremely tense. Some wanted the judge to impose a severe punishment on Mackenzie. Davian's mother said, "We don't seek revenge, we just want justice for our son. He was just an innocent passenger on his way home." The prosecution also showed videos of Mackenzie enjoying parties and concerts after her hospital discharge, indicating she had no remorse. However, others hoped for a more lenient sentence. Dominic's father showed remarkable forgiveness, stating Mackenzie was just a child who made a foolish mistake, but now her family was shattered. He hoped Mackenzie could receive help, some form of treatment, rather than lifelong imprisonment. On August 14, 2023, after 4 days of trial, the judge declared that when Mackenzie drove down that road, she ceased to be a responsible driver and had turned into a devil. She had a very clear objective and executed her plan with precision. Initially, this was a personal conflict between Mackenzie and Dominic, but Davian, an innocent bystander, got dragged into it. He just wanted a ride home. But clearly, in Mackenzie's eyes, one more life was no different from one more suitcase. She was completely indifferent to others' lives. Mackenzie's actions were controlled, calculated, deliberate, and purposeful. This was not an accident due to reckless driving, but a murder. With this argument, the court convicted Mackenzie on all 12 charges and sentenced her to life imprisonment, with the possibility of parole after 15 years. When the sentence was announced, Mackenzie appeared stunned and disbelieving, tears streaming down her face. Regarding this reaction, a body language expert commented, "Mackenzie shaking her head at this moment shows she still hasn't truly realized her mistake. Her tears are more likely for herself, not out of remorse or guilt." From Mackenzie's reaction, it's evident that she doesn't accept being convicted of murder in her heart. Those are crocodile tears, not worthy of sympathy. After the trial, Davian's mother spoke to the media, saying, "We miss our son every second of every day. Although justice was served today, honestly, there are no winners here. We've lost our son, and even with justice served, it can't bring him back." Although the case has concluded, the final judgment for Mackenzie continues to spark debate. Some argue that allowing her to seek parole after 15 years is too lenient, especially when compared to sentences for male offenders. The issue of whether women receive more lenient sentences became a focal point of discussion. However, there are those who firmly believe Mackenzie is innocent and that she genuinely had no knowledge of the accident. They argue that as an immature child, Mackenzie deserves forgiveness and shouldn't have her life ruined for one mistake. Some opinions even point directly at Mackenzie's parents as the real culprits, claiming their excessive indulgence led to her extreme personality and distorted character. Even as the sentence was announced and Mackenzie was led from the courtroom, her parents shouted, "My daughter is innocent." Mackenzie's mother continued to look for any excuse to defend her daughter, unwilling to let Mackenzie bear responsibility for her actions. Looking back at the entire case, the fate of the three young people changed completely, plunging three families into heartbreak due to one impulsive decision. The true state of mind of Mackenzie when she floored the accelerator into the building will likely remain a mystery, but the court's final judgment has become the best response to this tragedy. This is not only a consolation for the deceased, but also a profound warning to society at large. Story 5. This story revolves around a successful office worker who climbed the ladder of success through her own efforts to achieve admirable accomplishments and a young, handsome doctor from a prestigious family. They met in New York, but their story culminated in the mysterious disappearance of both. When the police investigated, a bizarre case slowly unfolded before the public. So what happened that year? What was the true nature of their relationship? Let's turn back the clock to 2003 to delve into the details of this case. New York is the largest city in the United States, not only the economic, financial, commercial, and cultural center of America, but also of the world. Mentioning this area, one cannot help but think of the vibrant Broadway or the bustling Wall Street. The city is also famous for its title as the City of Immigrants, where over 3 million people from all over the world live together, speaking more than 200 different languages. This is truly one of the most diverse and rich metropolises on Earth. Today's story also begins in this city with our protagonist, Maria Cruz, a successful office worker, or more precisely, a talented banking investment expert. After graduating with an MBA from Fordham University in New York, Maria started her career at Citibank as an analyst. Not long after, she moved to Barclays Capital, one of the world's leading financial institutions, taking up the position of senior credit analyst with a salary over $200,000 a year. For someone like Maria, who didn't have the support of a wealthy family, achieving this success was nothing short of becoming a winner in life. At 35, Maria was petite, standing at 1.5 meters and weighing only 40 kilograms, but this did not diminish her vibrant allure. Always loving and taking care of herself, Maria was particularly passionate about exercise and maintained a healthy lifestyle. This positive habit helped her keep a youthful appearance that many admired, making people mistakenly think she was only in her 20s. Maria was always content with her current life, a result of her hard work. Born in the Philippines, Maria left her homeland to pursue her dreams in distant America. That journey was far from easy, but through strong will and relentless effort, she not only succeeded as an immigrant, but also built an admirable career, proving her resilient spirit and desire to rise. For Maria, work was life. She was always punctual, dedicated, and wholehearted in everything she did. However, on that day, something strange happened. Maria was absent from work without any prior notice. April 14, 2003, an unusual Monday morning. Like every week, the company held its morning meeting, but this time everyone noticed the inexplicable absence of Maria, who was known for her punctuality and usually arrived first. Her mobile phone was unreachable, and no one answered the landline at her apartment. After 3 days of waiting without any news, Maria's colleagues could not sit still. A group decided to check on her at her apartment. They found that the Wall Street Journal newspapers from the last 3 days were piled up outside her door, a stark contrast to Maria's tidy and organized habits. Hans, Maria's boss, immediately contacted her emergency contact provided when she joined the company. It was her aunt living in New Jersey. This aunt sent her son to check on Maria's apartment. They broke into the apartment, and upon entering, everyone felt an eerie and cold atmosphere enveloping the place. In the kitchen, the sink was full of dirty dishes, and there was a bunch of grapes on the counter that hadn't been eaten. Everything in the apartment was neat, with no signs of disturbance or struggle. There was not even a drop of blood, but Maria had vanished without a trace. Maria's family immediately reported the incident to the police. However, in a city like New York, where the number of missing persons is always high, the police did not seem too concerned, or perhaps they lacked the resources to handle it. According to statistics, in just the first 4 months of 2003, the city recorded over 18,400 missing persons cases. If you count those from before, the number would be even higher, rendering the New York police completely helpless in tracking and investigating. This led to the reality that most missing persons cases eventually reached a dead end and became unsolved mysteries. Given this situation, Maria's family decided not to rely solely on the police. They printed numerous flyers to find their relative and posted them all over the streets and alleys of New York. They also contacted journalists to publish notices in major newspapers. They even set up a website to gather any useful information. However, after months of effort, the search yielded no significant results. The only clue the family received was that around 11 a.m. on April 13th, someone saw Maria at a church. Later, she returned to the office to pick up some documents needed for the next day's meeting. After this time, she completely disappeared, leaving no trace. The police, after checking surveillance cameras around Maria's apartment, noticed that in the final moments before her disappearance, she showed no unusual behavior. Maria, dressed in black, walked briskly along the street, seemingly in a hurry for an appointment. There was no one following her, nor any signs that she was being watched or in danger. So, how did Maria disappear? Who was the person she was in such a hurry to meet? From checking Maria's personal emails on her computer, the police discovered that she had been haunted for years by a condition known as black hairy tongue. This is an oral disease that darkens the tongue, not harmful to health, but highly unsightly, causing Maria to feel very self-conscious. She had tried various treatments, but none were particularly effective. Recently, she was undergoing laser treatment. However, just 2 days before her disappearance, Maria unexpectedly canceled her appointment with the doctor performing the laser therapy. Notably, according to credit card transactions, on the day she vanished, Maria was in the vicinity of that doctor's clinic. Furthermore, from the emails exchanged between Maria and the doctor, the police found that the day before she disappeared, she had withdrawn $400 in cash. This suggested that Maria might have actually met with this doctor before the incident occurred. Therefore, the police began to suspect that the man treating her with the laser might be involved in Maria's disappearance and started investigating him. This doctor was named Dean Faiello. As the police prepared to summon Dean for questioning, they discovered that his clinic had closed, the luxurious mansion was sold, and Dean had left the United States. His sudden abandonment of all assets and departure abroad made the situation even more suspicious. Dean Faiello was born in 1959 into a middle-class family in New Jersey. As a child, he was not only handsome, but also very intelligent, which endeared him to those around him. After graduating from Madison High School, Dean was voted most likely to succeed by his classmates. His family placed great expectations on their promising son's future. In 1977, Dean enrolled at Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute. With his suave appearance and athletic build, he always attracted the attention of female students on campus. It seemed everything was going well, until surprisingly, after completing his second year, Dean decided to drop out without a clear reason and returned home. He then started working at construction sites, eventually advancing to the position of a subcontractor. This job not only provided a stable income, but also helped him maintain his attractive physique. Initially, Dean's father was disappointed about his son dropping out, but seeing his success, he gradually accepted it. After all, in his view, every profession has its experts, and education wasn't the only path to success. However, Dean later did something that enraged his father to the point of hospitalization. He publicly acknowledged being gay, and frequently appeared at LGBT nightclubs. With his striking looks, Dean always became the center of attention and was warmly welcomed. Throughout the 1980s, he spent much of his time in these clubs, constantly changing boyfriends, leading to a very colorful and lavish personal life. Despite the chaotic love life, Dean achieved certain successes in his career. Not just a contractor, he also started his own company specializing in construction projects, from which he earned his first significant sum in his career. He then bought a luxurious house on Elwood Avenue in Newark. Although the house was somewhat old, it was famous for once being the home of Maria Jerica, a renowned international opera singer. However, after acquiring the house, Dean began a life of indulgence and lost motivation for work. He fell into bad habits like alcohol addiction and drug use. Dean often hosted all-night parties at home, and soon his savings were completely depleted, even though he could still earn from construction work. After a long period of lavish living, Dean found this field too hard and uninteresting. He started thinking about whether there was a job that was both easy and quick to make money, and as hoped, an opportunity presented itself. Entering the 1990s, Americans were increasingly obsessed with fashion and beauty. The wealthy were ready to spend lavishly to look better, and they didn't hesitate to pay for expensive beauty services. This created an environment for spas and wellness centers to flourish. While working at a spa center, Dean met its owner, Michael Hart. Michael recognized Dean's potential, but also saw that he was on a path of self-destruction. With sincerity, Michael advised Dean, "Abandon those bad habits, then work with me. You'll certainly earn more than from that grueling construction work." Perhaps Dean was attracted by the novelty, or maybe he saw an opportunity for quick wealth, so he decided to follow Michael's advice. He truly abandoned his decadent lifestyle and started working at the spa. Initially lacking experience, Dean could only perform simple tasks like waxing for clients. At first, he used waxing methods, but later, with the advent of laser technology, Dean quickly became an expert in laser hair removal. By 1995, after the spa's owner Michael passed away, Dean decided to move to Manhattan, New York, to seek new opportunities. There, he worked at a spa center run by dermatologist Dr. Lori Polis. This center was not only large-scale, but also served prestigious clients, including many Broadway actors and Hollywood stars. There were even rumors that Madonna was a regular there. Dean loved this place and was enchanted by New York's bustling, opportunity-rich life. After more than a year of work, he received much praise from clients and became more confident than ever. With his growing greed, Dean decided to go solo. Soon, he established his own clinic on Park Avenue, renting expensive laser equipment for his practice. Initially, Dean focused on laser hair removal, a specialty that had made his name. Thanks to his handsome appearance and skillful technique, his career quickly soared. But as money became abundant, the bad habits he had once abandoned, like alcohol and drug addiction, gradually returned. During the day, Dean dressed in a neat white coat, behaving courteously and gently with clients. But when night fell, he revealed a completely different nature, excessive drinking and uncontrolled drug use. Through his work, Dean had the opportunity to access an opioid drug called butorphanol, a potent painkiller. Just 2 milliliters of this drug was equivalent to 10 milliliters of morphine, enough to cause powerful pain relief. Soon, Dean became addicted to it. In reality, since working at the spa, Dean had frequently taken advantage of numbed clients to steal this drug. But as his addiction grew, just stealing wasn't enough. Dean began stealing Dr. Lori's prescriptions, forging signatures to write more for himself. This drug was extremely expensive, with each 2.5 milliliter vial costing up to $100, while Dean needed at least 1 vial a day. In October 1998, Dr. Lori Polis discovered someone had forged her signature to write multiple prescriptions. This was no laughing matter, as reckless drug use could lead to severe consequences, even life-threatening. Without hesitation, Lori reported it to the police. In a short time, the police quickly traced it back to Dean, and during the investigation, they found he also illegally possessed other banned substances. However, the court was quite lenient, sentencing him to 3 years of probation with mandatory drug rehabilitation. Despite making money quickly, his lavish spendthrift lifestyle led Dean into financial distress. After the incident, his financial situation worsened. With no other choice, Dean had to move his clinic to a location with cheaper rent. To quickly regain his finances, Dean worked relentlessly, even without taking weekends off. The range of services at his clinic expanded significantly, from initial laser hair removal to scar treatment, skin beautification, tattoo removal by laser, and other facial care services. As long as clients were willing to pay, Dean took it all on. During the time he seriously tried to kick his addiction and worked hard, Dean quickly built a loyal client base. But then, history repeated itself. With money in his pocket again, he returned to his old ways, sinking back into alcohol and drugs. Consequently, Dean became increasingly neglectful of his work. Not only did he deplete his savings, but he also found himself buried in debt. To cope, Dean borrowed money from his boyfriend, Greg Buck. Greg was quite generous, lending him a few $1,000s each time, but Dean was like a bottomless pit, never enough. Unable to pay the rent, Dean had to move his clinic once more, this time to 18th Street near Gramercy Park. At this point, his life seemed to have reached a dead end. Not only did he carry a heavy debt, but his relationship with Greg also deteriorated. The clinic's business was declining, with complaints from clients. Many reported that after treatments there, their skin suffered severe issues, even risking permanent damage. By September 2002, Dean's clinic had become the target of 3 groups of people. 2 of these groups were journalists, who had received information that Dean was practicing medicine illegally and had harmed several patients, so they were quietly gathering evidence. The 3rd group was the police, who began their investigation after receiving a complaint from Dr. Lori Polis. On October 6, 2002, after a period of secret investigation and evidence collection, the New York Post published a bombshell article on its front page. The content revolved around Dean, revealing that he had no medical knowledge, not even a college degree. Previously, he had only been a hair removal technician, but later opened his own clinic and expanded the services at an astonishing rate. The article also accused Dean of providing services that required professional qualifications and medical licenses, like removing birthmarks, tattoos, and even skin tumors with laser treatment. Neither Dean nor his clinic met the necessary standards. Many patients, after treatment there, suffered severe skin problems, even developing dangerous complications. After this article, Dean was quickly arrested for practicing medicine without a license. According to New York law at that time, this offense wasn't too severe, with a maximum sentence of 4 years. Dean posted a $5,000 bail and was released the same day, but with the condition that he could no longer practice. With no income, Dean began to assess his assets and realized he was carrying a debt of $500,000, an enormous sum. At the same time, he faced legal fees from the lawsuit. After much deliberation, Dean decided to sell the mansion in Newark he had bought earlier to address the immediate financial crisis. However, the house had significantly deteriorated. To sell it, Dean had to make some repairs, and the repair costs were also borrowed from his boyfriend, Greg Bach. Eventually, Dean's lawyer managed to reach a plea deal with the prosecution. Under this agreement, he only had to serve 6 months in jail. However, to secure a lighter sentence, Dean had to cooperate with the prosecution in investigating 2 doctors suspected of insurance fraud. For Dean, this seemed like an exceptionally good deal. All he needed to do was sell the house to pay off debts, get clean, serve the 6-month sentence, and he would have the chance to start anew with a legitimate business. But instead of complying, Dean continued to break the law. Before the court could deliver its verdict, he secretly opened an illegal clinic in an apartment at 115 West 16th Street, Manhattan, and advertised online to attract customers. During this time, a 35-year-old woman named Maria unfortunately crossed paths with Dean. Haunted by her condition of black hairy tongue, Maria was quickly convinced by Dean's promises. He boasted about his successes and medical expertise, assuring her he could completely cure her condition. Dean's polished appearance and professional demeanor left Maria without any suspicion. On April 13, 2003, according to the content of the emails found, Maria had withdrawn $400 in cash to visit Dean's clinic. Sadly, that was the last time Maria was seen alive. Simultaneously, a doctor at New York University Medical Center provided a crucial clue. He reported that on April 13th, Dean had called asking how to handle a female patient who had convulsions and went into shock after being injected with lidocaine. The doctor advised Dean to rush the patient to the emergency room for timely treatment. However, he wasn't sure if Dean followed his advice. By this point, the police began to piece together what really happened. The suspicions became clear, and Maria might have been Dean's latest victim. It's very possible that Dean had murdered Maria and then fled the country. However, this case had no body, only a missing person, which posed difficulties for the prosecution. When everything seemed at a deadlock, a crucial lead emerged from Dean's boyfriend, Greg Bach. He recounted a strange incident that happened before Dean sold the house in Newark. Although the house was to be sold the next day, the night before, Dean had some very secretive actions. He brought a lot of cement into the garage. When Greg inadvertently went in there, he was yelled at and chased out by Dean. Greg distinctly remembered a very odd smell in the garage at that time. This event coincided with Maria's disappearance. The police immediately went to Newark to check the house. Although it now had new owners, after some persuasion, they quickly agreed to let the police inspect the garage. On February 18th, during excavation, the police found a black suitcase containing Maria's body. Although Dean had escaped, this significant clue helped the police clarify the case, bringing Maria's murder to justice. Tracking down Dean was not difficult. Through exit records, the police discovered that he had used a short-term visa to fly to Costa Rica. They further traced emails to friends and pinpointed his IP address in the capital San Jose, where Dean frequented gay nightclubs. A local journalist had seen Dean at one of these clubs. The investigation team publicized Dean's image in newspapers, and soon, the owner of a resort contacted them with information. "The person in the photo is at my resort. Please come quickly." On February 26, 2004, the Costa Rican police arrived at the resort where Dean was lounging by the pool. Upon seeing the police, Dean did not panic or resist, but surrendered willingly. Dean was fully aware of his crimes. If he returned to the U.S., he would face life imprisonment for first-degree murder, or at least 25 years for second-degree murder. Therefore, he was determined not to return to the U.S. He hired an immigration lawyer to find loopholes in the extradition treaty between Costa Rica and the U.S. This country did not require the extradition of its own citizens. Thus, Dean thought that if he could become a Costa Rican citizen, all would be resolved. However, naturalization was impossible. Dean devised another plan, proposing to be adopted by a couple who had previously owned the house. By doing so, he would gain Costa Rican citizenship. But this idea was rejected by the judge, as the couple was younger than Dean, and theoretically, having children older than their parents was too absurd. Hence, the judge dismissed the adoption request. Even though Dean tried many more ways to avoid extradition, all failed. Finally, in May 2005, Dean was sent back to the U.S. Although this case lacked direct witnesses and clear physical evidence, the gathered evidence was sufficient to hold Dean accountable for his crimes. Dean knew he couldn't evade responsibility, so he decided to confess. He made a deal with the prosecutor, agreeing to plead guilty to charges of first-degree assault and practicing medicine without a license in exchange for a 20-year prison sentence. However, to get a reduced sentence, Dean had to detail his criminal process. He recounted, on April 13, 2003, Dean had Maria come to the illegal clinic he had set up in an apartment for treatment. While Maria was on the operating table, Dean began injecting lidocaine into her tongue. Initially, one injection was ineffective, so Dean proceeded with a second, then several more. After that, Maria started convulsing. If he were a professional doctor, he would have immediately recognized this as a potential sign of an allergic reaction to lidocaine. A simple antidote injection and quick transport to the hospital would have prevented serious issues. But Dean was not a doctor. Seeing Maria convulse, then slip into a coma, Dean panicked and didn't know what to do. His only action was to call a friend and ask for David's number, the head of the emergency department at New York University Medical Center. Dean urgently called David for advice. Because the girl was in shock from the lidocaine injection, David advised Dean, call an ambulance and take her to the hospital immediately for emergency treatment. However, Dean feared his illegal clinic would be discovered and his unauthorized medical practice during bail would be exposed. Therefore, he did not perform any emergency measures, but just watched Maria silently. When he realized Maria had no signs of life, Dean found a black suitcase. Given Maria's small stature, the murderer could easily fit her inside the suitcase and casually place it in his car's trunk, driving home. 2 days later, Dean buried Maria in the garage of the house he was about to sell. Notably, after the shock from lidocaine allergy, the victim might not have died immediately. In September 2003, Dean sold the house and left the country. The house was sold for $450,000, but he only repaid Greg Bach $10,000 of the $95,000 owed, with other debts receiving only a small fraction of repayment. After arriving in Costa Rica, instead of hiding, Dean used the money from the house sale to live luxuriously, staying in high-end resorts, frequenting bars and karaoke until his arrest. Although sentenced to 20 years, Dean served only 17 years at Attica Correctional Facility before being released early for good behavior. During his incarceration, he spent much time writing. After his release, Dean worked as a maintenance worker at a grocery store. In 2022, he participated in an interview with ABC, where he admitted he was not a doctor and had practiced medicine without a license. He also revealed that the night before treating Maria, he had consumed a large amount of drugs and alcohol, still feeling the effects the next day. In the interview, Dean publicly apologized to Maria's family for the first time. "Every day I think about Maria, her family, and why I acted like such a coward. She was truly very forgiving. I learned a lot from her. I believe she helped make me a better person. I can never atone for the crimes I've committed. Now the best I can do is help others avoid making the same mistakes I did." Though Dean was legally punished and publicly apologized for Maria's family, the pain of losing their daughter would never fade. Notably, before Maria's tragedy, Dean had operated his clinic for 7 years. Despite numerous complaints over this period, Dean always escaped accountability, simply changing locations and continuing his practice. Simple services like laser hair removal were tolerable, but complex laser treatments should only be performed by licensed doctors. Dean, without medical credentials, managed to practice illegally for so long, highlighting serious issues in oversight and management. From Maria's case, we learn a profound lesson about vigilance and responsibility in personal health care. While the desire for beauty is legitimate, choosing reputable facilities and qualified licensed doctors is crucial. Don't let misplaced trust lead to irreparable, heartbreaking consequences. This story also serves as a reminder of the responsibility of regulatory bodies to closely monitor medical and aesthetic facilities, preventing cases like Dean from operating unchecked. It's a wake-up call for those who disregard human life and practice illegally, as the law will not overlook any wrongdoing. Story 6. Saturday, January 18th, 2003, the Lunar New Year holiday had just ended, and for attorney Neil Davis, it was not a good start to the year. He made his way to a familiar place, the Harris County District Attorney's office. As a criminal defense lawyer, Neil had been there countless times, but today, his mood was truly awful as he stood before the building. Neil sternly told the client had come to him early that morning, saying there was a body buried in her backyard. Neil hoped the prosecutor would notify the police to check the scene. He provided an address in the suburbs of Houston. Neil's statement shocked everyone in the room. They asked who the woman was and why there was a body buried in her yard. Neil said it was Susan, 26 years old, and the body buried in the backyard was that of her husband, Jeff Wright, 34 years old. However, as her attorney, Neil could not disclose further details. He also emphasized that the police and prosecutor should not question Susan at this time because she was receiving treatment at a mental hospital. Following the address provided by Neil, the police quickly arrived at the scene at a house in the northwest suburbs of Houston. Upon entering, the house was very clean and showed no signs of a struggle. But in the backyard, the police witnessed a horrifying scene. They discovered a naked man with his lower half buried deep in the ground. Upon examination, the police determined the body had been buried for quite some time and was decomposing. There were signs of dogs digging around, possibly due to the smell. The man's hands were bound with black rope, and one hand was badly chewed by dogs. When they pulled the body from the ground, the police confirmed it was Jeff Wright. But the most horrifying aspect was that the body bore 193 stab wounds, with 41 on the face alone, indicating extreme rage by the perpetrator. In the backyard, the police found more evidence, including a blood-soaked double mattress, which could have been the initial crime scene. There were many unused bags of garden soil, a shovel, and a red-stained wheelbarrow, possibly used to move the victim's body. From these clues, the police suspected Susan as the prime suspect. Neil, Susan's lawyer, stated that she had confessed to being the killer, but claimed she killed Jeff in self-defense. On January 23, 2003, 5 days after discovering Jeff's body, the police arrested Susan at the mental hospital after receiving permission from her doctors. The case quickly became a hot topic, making headlines in local newspapers and even attracting attention across the United States. During the preliminary hearing, Neil declared that Susan was a victim of domestic abuse and that killing Jeff was in self-defense. Susan was released on bail with the condition of surveillance and allowed to reunite with her children on weekends. 1 year later, on February 24, 2004, the trial officially began. Standing before a jury of 7 men and 5 women, Neil described Susan as an unfortunate woman. However, convincing the jury that 193 stab wounds were in self-defense was not easy. To explain further, Neil decided to let Susan tell her entire story herself. Susan testified that she met Jeff in April 1997, when she was just 20 years old. Susan had graduated high school and was working at a hair salon while studying nursing. During a trip to Galveston Island, she met Jeff, then 29, a successful and sophisticated man. Jeff quickly won Susan's affection with his chivalry and generosity. In 1998, Susan became pregnant. After meeting both families, Jeff expressed his love and promised to bring happiness to her. He said that though he was just a salesman now, he would eventually start his own company. They married that October, and a month later, their first son Bradley was born. However, family life was not as happy as she had hoped. After giving birth, Susan suffered from depression. But Jeff not only didn't comfort her, but also blamed and mocked her. He threw away her antidepressants prescribed by doctors, controlled when she could leave the house, even limiting shopping trips to an hour and a half. In April 1999, after moving to their new home, Jeff became increasingly aggressive, often abusing Susan over trivial matters like a messy house, unpalatable food, or high electricity bills. He also used stimulants, and when drunk, he would torment her both physically and mentally. Susan once fled to stay with her sister Cindy, but after just one day, Jeff found her and threatened that if she didn't return, he would kill their son or her. Out of concern for her child's safety, Susan relented. At the end of 2000, Susan was pregnant again, but lost the baby after Jeff kicked her in the stomach during an argument. Despite this, she retained her ability to bear children and gave birth to a daughter, Kaylee, in December 2001. However, postpartum depression recurred, making Jeff despise her even more. Susan recounted, "He called me stupid, useless, and constantly mocked my body. He would push me against the wall, shake my arm hard until he calmed down. Not only that, Jeff cheated and infected Susan with an STD. He brazenly said, 'If you were a good wife, I wouldn't need to look elsewhere.'" On January 13, 2003, Jeff returned home after a boxing session. Susan recognized the aggressive look in his eyes as a sign of drug use. Jeff insisted that his son Bradley box with him. When the boy refused, Jeff slapped him. Susan intervened, and after calming Bradley down to sleep, she directly confronted Jeff. For the first time in years together, Susan dared to argue forcefully with Jeff about his drug use and violence towards her and their children. In his drug-fueled rage, Jeff pushed Susan onto the bed and began to assault her. Seeing Susan resist, he let go, went outside, and returned with a knife in hand. Jeff directed the knife towards her. In the fierce struggle, Susan smartly kicked Jeff in the groin to escape, but was grabbed again. Terrified, Susan snatched the knife from Jeff and repeatedly stabbed him. After killing Jeff, Susan buried him in a hole in the backyard, one that Jeff had dug days before to build a Susan's account shocked the courtroom. She concluded her testimony with heart-wrenching details of a nightmarish marriage, leading to the horrific event in the backyard. She affirmed that her actions were only to protect herself and her son from Jeff. Susan's tearful testimony elicited sympathy from many. The scales of justice seemed to tilt in her favor, but her adversary was prosecutor Kelly Siegler, who would turn everything into Susan's worst nightmare. At 42 years old, Kelly Siegler was the deputy district attorney of Harris County, Texas. Before taking on this case, she had participated in over 200 trials and was the head of the Special Crimes Division in the prosecutor's office. After listening to Susan's testimony, Kelly stood up, cold and decisive. She began her counterattack, exposing the inconsistencies in Susan's story. Kelly asserted, "To understand what happened that night and determine Susan's guilt or innocence, we must first look at who she really is." Susan was born in 1976, with an older sister and brother. In high school, she was an average student, mostly getting C's. She had a few romances, none particularly noteworthy. However, at 17, Susan underwent a complete transformation. Although underage, she worked at a strip club in Houston for 2 months. Susan claimed that Jeff frequently abused her, but Kelly pointed out there was no evidence to support this. There were no medical records indicating injuries or signs of abuse, no reports from Child Protective Services. The witnesses were only Susan's family and friends, while Jeff's family and friends maintained he was a loving father, never seeing signs of Susan being abused. Kelly emphasized, "Where are the doctors? Where are the medical experts? All we have is the defendant's self-diagnosis." Kelly also discredited Susan's account of the night of the crime. Jeff was a boxer, 45 kilograms heavier than Susan. How could she have snatched the knife from him? She couldn't even explain why Jeff's sensitive areas had minor wounds and traces of dripped candle wax. With 193 stabs, this wasn't an act of self-defense and panic. Kelly decided to bring the bed and mattress from the crime scene into the courtroom to reenact her theory. Evidence showed Jeff was bound with ties and a bathrobe belt, completely unable to resist. Kelly claimed Susan was a talented actress, a perfect liar. The details Susan recounted, with such anguish, were clearly at odds with the physical evidence at the scene and the forensic analysis. Investigator Mark Reynolds, who was first at the scene, along with Kelly and a colleague, reenacted how Jeff was subdued. Kelly illustrated that Jeff was bound at the hands and feet, becoming a prey in a completely helpless state. Mark Reynolds stated, most of the wounds on Jeff's body were deep and forceful stabs from above. Kelly concluded that Susan didn't just attack, but deliberately tortured Jeff. This was not self-defense. In response to these accusations, Susan explained that she didn't initially tie up Jeff. During their struggle, her son knocked on the door due to the noise. To calm the crying child outside, Susan bound Jeff's hands and feet to the bed, hiding the knife because she feared he might attack her if he got up. After soothing her son, Susan went to the kitchen for another knife, returned to the room, and continued to stab Jeff until he stopped breathing. She then pulled Jeff off the bed, but accidentally knocked over a burning candle on the nightstand, causing wax to drip onto him. When asked why she didn't call the police, Susan said it was because Jeff was still alive. She explained that at that moment, what was happening in the room completely overwhelmed her mind. Everything was too terrifying and horrifying. However, Kelly wouldn't accept this excuse. She pointed out that the crime scene, the main bedroom, had been meticulously cleaned. The walls were repainted, part of the carpet was cut out, and 3 cans of disinfectant were found in the room. Susan's jeans also had traces of disinfectant. Kelly questioned how, if Susan was truly in a disarray, she could plan to buy disinfectant, bags of soil, clean up the blood on the furniture, repaint the walls, and cut the carpet. These actions suggested she was very much in control and trying to cover up the truth. Susan continued with an implausible explanation that it was Jeff who demanded cleanliness. She was afraid that if Jeff returned from hell to find the house messy, he would be angry with her. She also claimed that at that time, she was still in a state of confusion and genuinely believed Jeff wasn't dead, even thinking he could return as a zombie to attack her. Kelly completely dismissed this defense. She emphasized that in the week following the crime, Susan carried on with life as normal, caring for her children, shopping, and buying cleaning supplies. Notably, 2 days after killing Jeff, she went to the police to request a restraining order against him, citing domestic abuse. Kelly argued that if Susan was truly in panic, why didn't she immediately report that she had killed Jeff in self-defense? Susan's true motives gradually became clear when, 2 days after the crime, she went to the insurance company to claim the $200,000 life insurance policy Jeff had purchased. Kelly questioned how, if Susan was truly disoriented, she could remember this insurance policy and file the claim so quickly. After much debate, Susan's story could not convince the jury. The jury foreman declared Susan guilty of murder. She was sentenced to 25 years in prison in Texas, although the prosecution had asked for 45 years. The jury considered this sentence fair. However, the case was far from simple because the appearance of a significant figure brought hope for Susan. That person was Brian Weiss, a renowned criminal defense attorney in Houston. At that time, he was invited by a television station to comment on Susan's case. To study the case more thoroughly, he attended most of the court sessions. After witnessing all the evidence firsthand, Brian believed that Susan's case still had a chance for a reversal. Therefore, he took the initiative to contact Susan and joined her appeal team on the condition that he would defend her for free. In 2005, attorney Brian filed for a retrial of Susan's case, arguing that the prosecution's presentation in court was unfair. He claimed that prosecutor Kelly and the investigators had not fully represented the facts of the case, but relied on speculation and interpretation of physical evidence. In November 2005, 3 judges from the 14th Court of Appeals in Texas discussed and unanimously agreed that there were no witnesses present on the night of the crime. Thus, Kelly's hypothesis could not be 100% accurate. However, the prosecution had clarified this to the jury before presenting their case. They confirmed that the victim was indeed bound to the bed, but minor details like the exact time and position of binding would not affect the overall judgment of the case. Therefore, the appeal was denied, and the original sentence was upheld. Brian did not give up, and in 2008, he appealed again. This trial was still presided over by Judge Jim, who had handled the initial trial. The main issue of this hearing was whether Susan should have her sentence reviewed and a new trial held to reconsider her punishment. Brian argued that during Susan's initial trial, attorney Neil Davis did not exert all effort to defend her. Neil hadn't even called Dr. Brown, Susan's primary treating psychiatrist, who confirmed that Susan was in a state of mental collapse while in the hospital with signs of abuse. However, Neil stated that he initially intended to call Dr. Brown to testify, but after speaking with him, he changed his mind. In their conversation, Neil learned that Susan had told Dr. Brown she attacked Jeff while he was asleep, which clearly contradicted her courtroom testimony. Neil also pointed out that the 25-year sentence for first murder was already a stroke of luck for Susan, as prosecutor Kelly had requested 45 years. When everyone thought Brian's appeal would fail, he introduced a crucial witness, Misty McMichael. If you're familiar with American football, you'll recognize the name McMichael because Misty's husband, Steve McMichael, is a famous football superstar who helped the Chicago Bears win the 1986 Super Bowl before becoming a professional wrestler. Misty had a 4-year relationship with Jeff, even considering marriage. She believed she had much in common with Susan. Both were strippers, both loved Jeff, and both were victims of his abuse. In 1991, Misty called the police after Jeff assaulted her at a bar just because she looked at another man. After the argument, Jeff threw a glass in Misty's face, causing a shard to embed in her chin. After Jeff was arrested, he admitted his guilt, and Misty decided not to press charges. She also revealed that though Jeff appeared to be a successful businessman, he was actually dealing in illegal substances. Neil said during the initial trial, he tried to contact Misty multiple times, but she didn't answer phone calls or respond to messages. Later, many questioned the authenticity of Misty's testimony because she seemed insincere and only looking for attention. The judge then decided to accept Brian's appeal and reopen the sentencing hearing for Susan. The judge believed that if the jury had known Misty's testimony, they might have given a different sentence. Therefore, he decided to accept the appeal and hold a new sentencing hearing. On November 20, 2010, Susan won in the resentencing hearing with her sentence reduced from 25 years to 20 years. However, in 2014, her first parole request was denied. But on July 2, 2020, her third parole application was accepted, and on December 30, 2020, after 16 years in prison, Susan was released. Information from the prison warden states that Susan was released at 9:30 a.m. She left the prison in silence, avoiding the media. Currently, Susan is under supervision and must wear an electronic monitoring device for authorities to track her. She is also not allowed to leave Texas until her supervision ends in February 2024. Susan's case has concluded, but it still provokes fierce debate among the public. Some believe she is a cold-blooded murderer who acted brilliantly, suggesting if not for her tears in court, she might not have had her sentence reduced. As the rain falls and the night deepens, thank you for being here with me at Radio Night Crime. True crime stories remind us of life's mysteries and the need to stay aware, even in the stillness of the night. If you enjoyed tonight's story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Let the sound of the rain lull you to sleep, and until next time, stay safe, stay curious, and let the night keep you company.